Hello and welcome to our Affinity webinar series. Today I'll be focusing on adding vendors. My name is Julie Bilodeau and I've prepared for you a 30-minute webinar presented in NAV 2013 R2 for our Compass Retail Advanced users. I'm going to walk through with you each fast tab of the vendor page and also show you how to add default dimensions for that new vendor. Please note we do have a manual called AP Setting Up New Vendors. That's manual number 12. I'll be speaking to most of that manual's content, but if there's any more you want to read that you see here in my webinar, feel free to go back to that manual and see if there's any additional notes on that, or feel free to contact us. That's what we're here for. I will only be reviewing fields that we use in Compass Retail Advanced, specific to setting up a new vendor, what's mandatory for that. You'll notice more fields available, but I'm only going to address those that we really need to have that vendor function in Compass. So without further ado, let's move to our scenario of how to add new vendors. So here we are in Compass. Now, in order to add a new vendor, you're going to need to get to the vendor list. And once you're there, you're going to press on New. Now, I'm not going to do that for us today, although that sounds counterintuitive, but rather than having you look at a lot of empty fields and blank fields, I thought I would show you my latest vendor here that I created for us today called Supreme Grains. So you're going to, when you press New, you're going to have a window pop up like this, just everything will be empty. So this way you can have an example of what the data looks like per field that I talk about today. So you'll notice there are many fast tabs here. One of them is called General. There's others here, Communication, Invoicing, etc. We're going to walk through each one of them today when we set up our vendor. So in the General tab, the number will be blank for you when you first open it. So all you need to do to have it populate or generate a new number is just click off into the Name field. Now, bear in mind with this number that it is a mandatory field. It can never be duplicated. Each vendor will therefore have its own unique number. So once that's generated, once you've clicked off, you're going to enter the vendor name here, the full name. And there's also a name too. If this were a person and you want to have the business name here, you can put it under name too. Depends on what you want showing on your invoicing later, what you want to show up first and then second in those documents that you might print out for this vendor later on. Of course, enter the vendor's address in these corresponding fields. And this address will be used on various system documents and reporting like purchase invoices or any kind of vendor statements you might be doing. And of course, these are pretty self-evident. I put CA here for Canada, the phone number of my vendor. Now these primary contact and contact number fields, they're actually optional. It's just extra information for you to enter about the person you regularly contact at the vendor. It's just really a useful field for you should you want to have it there. And bear in mind it will appear in print, so make sure you enter the name as you want it to appear on a document later. Now you'll notice here in the search name, I've actually changed this. What you'll notice when you first enter the name here of your new vendor and you tab off, it will automatically populate the search name to be the same as here. And I've changed this for us just so you're aware that you can enter a new search name so that, let's say the vendor name isn't very intuitive for you to search later and you really know the vendor maybe personally, or you know the family that owns that company and you want to search on them that way in the system at a later time, you can certainly change the search name to that. So I know the Birch Brothers and I know that this is one of their companies, and I know that both of them worked there, and if I want to ever search on it later, I can certainly put I can always search at Birch Brothers later on. So just so you know that that's available for you should you want to use that. Otherwise, it will just default to the name here. Now, purchaser code, here you can select a code to specify the purchaser who normally handles this vendor account. So when the code's been entered here, the program's automatically going to suggest this purchaser as a default when you create the quotes or orders or credit memos for this vendor. Now let's move on to the Communications tab. Now, none of these fields are required, but you can enter the information you have available. You'll notice that the phone number here defaults from the general fast tab we were just at. With that phone number, that just comes in here automatically. Feel free to enter any other information you want here. One note about the email. Compass has a built-in functionality where you can email documents and/or reports directly to a vendor. You'll need to have that email here in order to have that function properly. So that's where email would come in handy to you. Now let's move on to the Invoicing tab. So this Invoicing Fast tab has a vendor number here, and please leave it blank. Unless you have a separate vendor that makes payments for this vendor you're creating. So maybe this vendor has a third party paying invoices on their behalf. That's where you would put that third party information in here. Tax liable is very important. You need to have this checked so that the vendor, that's charging you taxes on their invoicing will actually be recognized in the system. So we're going to have that tagged on, and the tax area code will pertain to the tax area in which you're being charged on. In this case, I put Manitoba, although because we may be located in Ontario, I may have to put Ontario tax here. If you have any more questions about tax setup at all, please feel free to contact us. We'll be happy to help walk you through what needs to be populated here for your scenario. You'll also notice this general business posting group. That's always going to be set to vendor. This is where Compass is going to link the vendor to the payables account when making a purchase. Next field is vendor posting group, just as important as the business posting group. Here we're going to choose Canadian. This is where the GL accounts posted for the vendor are going to be driven towards. It defines accounts for payables, service charges, payment discounts amounts, should there be any, and invoice rounding amounts. Okay, there's invoice discount code. So when you set up this new vendor, the program's automatically going to enter this here. If you want any more information on that, feel free to see our manual. There's actually some more tidbits of information there for you to read up on. I won't get into it here, but just so you know, this will automatically populate. And the last is a prepayment percentage field. It's recommended this field be left at 0. It can contain a prepayment percent that applies to all orders for this vendor, regardless of the items or services on the order lines. Again, if you think you want to use this in any way, please contact us first so we can make sure that it's set up properly and it will actually function in the way that you expect. So now we're going to move on to the Payments Fast tab. The first field you'll notice on this tab is Application Method. And this is very similar to the customer setup, in case you're already familiar with that. There's two values here, manual and apply to oldest. And we recommend that the field remain at manual. These settings refer to how Compass will apply payments to invoices or credit memos to invoices. Manual allows the user to choose the invoice to apply the payment to, for instance, whereas apply to oldest, you're actually giving Compass, the system, is actually going to apply payments to the first earliest open invoice in the vendor ledger. You may not always want that. It may not always be the case that you're going to be paying the first open invoice on the vendor's ledger. So that's why we recommend putting it to manual. So that's the best practice. This way you have more or less full control over how the system documents and payments are going to be applied to one another. You'll also notice the payment terms code. It stands for a formula that calculates the due date, any payment discount dates, and payment discount percent. Notice them here. This is a default. You can change the payment terms in a purchase order or purchase invoice as it applies to your situation. So, and this term, by the way, would also be used in any reporting around this in this area. So I'm going to put a net of 30 that we've got. The vendor gives us a net of 30 days to pay our invoices. Payment method code, this is also a default, allows you to show how you tend to pay the vendor. It's inserted, in this case I put bank transfer. It's inserted on the purchase invoices for the vendor, but also can be changed at that point too. Remember, this is just a default. Priority is a field where you can enter a rank. Really, you're giving your vendor priority with payment compared to the rest of your vendors. So if this is at 0, it has no priority in terms of based on other vendors that you need to pay. Should you put a 1 in here, let's say, it means this is the most important vendor to pay. We must pay this vendor above anyone else. And this drives the filtering of the vendors that are brought into your payment journal through the suggest vendor payments function. So that's a bit about that. I'm going to leave mine at 0. Now for account number, this is if you have any specific account number with this vendor, feel free to enter it there. So now I'm going to move on to our receiving FAST tab. And I'm only going to touch on 2 fields here. First is the location code field. So this is a default location of the vendor from which you receive inventory. So maybe you're picking it up, or sorry, rather that your location is receiving inventory. Your location 2 tends to receive inventory from this vendor. The shipment method code is the second field I'll mention here. Here you can select a code for the method that you want the vendor to use when shipping items to you. So once you've entered the code here, you'll see other options here, pickup, courier. Once you've entered the code here, it will print orders. To the orders sent to the vendor that are printed will suggest this shipment method as a default. It's not mandatory, but just to let you know it's there. Now let's go to the foreign trade FAST tab. Currency code. We're going to leave this currency code empty. And this may seem counterintuitive, but in NAV, an empty currency code indicates that the vendor is operating in local currency. So we're only going to populate this if they're in any other currency but our own, like USD. So for instance, there's USD in the list. But we're going to leave it blank because they're local, just like we are. Now, check date format and check date separator I've entered here because this is used to issue your vendor checks. So make sure you know from the vendor what their date format is, and the separator that tends to be // but again, it depends on your vendor. So make sure you learn that from your vendor and enter it appropriately here. So now we've actually gone through all of our FAST tabs in our vendor page, and that leads us to the last piece, which is to set up our default dimensions. So we recommend setting up dimensions for each vendor to increase the efficiency and data integrity in your system. Whenever a vendor is used in transactions, these dimensions are going to populate automatically so the user doesn't have to manually key them in every time. And in case you're not aware of what dimensions are, they're added information that will post through to the GL. It gives you the ability to analyze your data. So in order to enter the default dimensions for your new vendor, we're going to go to the Navigate ribbon here and select Dimensions. And so this window pops up. Well, there's only one dimension we want to enter here, one default, and that is SUP. Short for supplier. So what I did was I selected it from the drop down here, and this is where you would choose which dimension value code pertains to your vendor. In my case, this vendor isn't associated with BASF or Syngenta. I'm just going to choose general supplier. And for the value posting here, I'm going to choose same code. Okay. And just so you know, in brief, these value postings dictate what dimension code, value code, which one here, is going to be used when posting transaction for any particular record, like vendors in this case. So by setting same code, we're telling Compass that for this vendor, this vendor for the supplier dimension code must be Gen L, must be the general supplier. Okay, so if you want to learn any more about that, there is more description on each one of these in our manual. And if that's not enough, feel free to contact us. We'll be happy to explain further. So here we're going to press OK. And we're going to press OK for our vendor. All right, stepping back to where we started here at our scenario, I just want to tell you that we've concluded how to set up a new vendor in Compass. I hope it was insightful to you and useful to you. We actually only spent about 15 minutes, which gives us plenty of time to say thank you for attending. So thank you for taking the time to join me today. Again, I'm Julie with the Affinity team here, and I'm going to be producing more and more webinars as we go to help serve you better. If you have any ideas for future topics we can cover in our Affinity webinar series, please feel free to let us know. You can reach us by email here, as you can see, at support@affinitylimited.com, or by phone at 1-866-278-9530. Our team here, we're here to serve you. If you have any feedback on this particular webinar, feel free to let us know at the same places. We would love to hear from you because that's what we're here for. So thank you again for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.